So let me first introduce the panelists of today. The first one is Bill Gestermeyer, NASA Associate Administrator, Human Exploration and Ops Missions. Bill, thank you for coming. Then let me call on stage George Nield, Associate Administrator, Commercial Space Transportation at FAA. Thank you, George, for coming. Now please welcome George Whiteside, CEO and President of Virgin Galactic. George. Thank you. And then it's my pleasure to introduce Alan Ball, Founding Director, Reaction Engines. Now we have Luz Fabregat from Arianespace, Vice President for Business Development. Thank you for coming. And last but not least, Silvio Sandrone, Head of Business and New Programs Development at the EADS Astron. Ciao, Silvio. So, first of all, I would like to briefly introduce the main goals we would like to reach and to share with you with the discussion here today. We are talking very often during these very days about projections and forecasts of human expansion beyond the Earth boundaries and space colonization, present and potential commercial human spaceflight market, and the parallel evolution of space agencies' role in this respect. We would like here to address experiences and lessons learned, but also the importance of a vision for the future, and how the current status of development in commercial human spaceflight can have an impact on the future of human exploration. We, the community, need to take an adequate position to sustain this development for the benefit of humankind, also underlining the importance of these developments in an hopefully growing worldwide economy in the near future. And I cannot forget to mention space safety and how important it is in these very days, related also to the expected increase of space traffic and its interaction with air traffic management. This is becoming a global issue, and a global solution must be found. We are used to work in cooperation, and we can do it better, integrating more and more the various components in the community. You will be really inspired, I believe, by this plenary, and I do hope, you will leave today this plenary with the understanding that the private and public space endeavors are complementing each other, and that collaboration is not providing only the summing up of the components, but far more. But now, let's start with some questions. And the first question I would like to ask the first panelist is, let's say, related to more the governmental role in the promotion of commercial human spaceflight. So, Bill, how do you value the US Congress and NASA's decision to strongly support the development of private commercial human spaceflight endeavors after the successful launch in May of SpaceX, Falcon and Dragon? Bill.
I think it's tremendously important for us to... Is that better? Okay. I think it's tremendously important to us that the commercial space activity takes off and moves forward. And from a government standpoint, we need to do everything we can to enable the commercial industry to take a larger role appropriate with their expertise in various areas. The cargo flights that you got to see with the SpaceX Dragon demonstration flight was a tremendous success. The Dragon vehicle is now down at the Cape getting ready for a launch on Sunday. Again, that'll be their first commercial flight to deliver cargo. So I think it's important that governments enable that activity. We're able to offload some of our work to the private industry. They can do it with less overhead, less restrictions, and move forward and actually progress and allow us to move faster forward by their participation. So we need to continue to look for smart ways to do that and to take what we've learned over many decades and pass that off to the commercial sector, let them take it with their new expertise and move forward, and then likewise we on the government side can learn from the way they take those activities and move forward and apply them to our more traditional programs that we're working in parallel.
Thank you. Let me ask George, Do you want to add something to what Bill just said on that, from your standpoint?
Yes, I'd like to, first of all, congratulate NASA and private industry for the significant advancements that have been made recently in terms of commercial space transportation. If you look at the ongoing success of the International Space Station and the significant achievements with our exploration programs, it's easy to forget, but right now we are in the middle of a very, very important transition. Ever since the beginning of the space age more than 50 years ago, it's been federal governments who have been responsible to design and build and operate our launch vehicles and spacecraft. Going forward, though, private industry is going to have an increasingly important role, both for low Earth orbit transportation and for suborbital activities. And at the FAA, we are very excited to be working with NASA and the industry on this to carry out our statutory mission, which includes not only ensuring public safety during these commercial space transportation activities, but also our role to encourage, facilitate, and promote commercial space transportation.
Thank you, George. Very interesting. So it's not quite natural that I ask, let's say, a couple of questions to George Whiteside, because, you know, George, you've been experiencing a lot in the last few years in developing suborbital space tourism and activities. I mean, at least preparing for that. And I believe that this is also important for in-orbit operations preparation, I mean, in the future. So, but having said that, which is your perception about the regulatory activities in the US, and what about the rest of the world, since you are also traveling a lot and having a look at the other countries in the world?
So, Simona, recognizing that you're asking me, so what do I think of the job that George is doing?
Yeah, yeah, it's a way.
Just to make that clear.
Doing a very good job.
Not surprisingly, I think George is doing a great job.
Yeah.
And, no, but quite seriously, I think you know, the FAA and Congress also recognize that for the suborbital industry to get off the ground, that we probably had to go through a different regulatory regime than that which is in place for commercial aviation, because we don't know all that we need to know about how to build a safe vehicle, and so they set up an informed consent regime where essentially passengers were permitted to fly in vehicles that were riskier than a commercial airliner if they went through a process where they were fully informed of the risks. I think that's the right posture for the start of this industry. And I think what's interesting now is as we constantly get approached by entities and countries from around the world who would love us to fly out of their countries. And obviously we're going to start in the Spaceport America in New Mexico, but we constantly get these approaches. And I say that, you know, a good place to start is actually looking at the regulatory framework that George has put in place, because I think that it would be positive for the world if we can set up a regulatory framework that is common, or at least connected, so that the vehicles that are mostly being developed in the US right now, but that will be developed in other countries as well, can sort of have a common regulatory framework to fly in.
And so just the second part of my question was, how do you see or how do you perceive, let's say, the same activities, if any, in other countries outside the US? You see regulatory activities also in other countries, since you are also having clients and customers everywhere, or not?
Well, George actually may know better than I, because I think you get formal approaches as well. But what we see is countries are starting to engage with this. They're not necessarily fully engaged. They're not necessarily drafting legislation. But I think, you know, you look at Sweden or Curacao or United Arab Emirates, different places, they're certainly starting to think about these issues. And I think that that's great. And hopefully there can be a positive conversation between George, who's now been doing it for many years, and those countries.
And do you, sorry if I put another question on your shoulders, but how do you perceive the safety aspect of this endeavor? I mean, how your company is focusing on space safety? What are you doing in order to assure that space safety is really, let's say, well in your agenda?
Well, we don't have a business if we don't have a vehicle that is considered safe. And so, you know, space flight is risky, and I think it's probably not good to sort of say that these vehicles are going to be, you know, safe in the context of commercial airliners. You know, they're going to be riskier than that.
Yeah.
But we know that we have to have as safe a vehicle. We've sort of, it's clear that we've taken our time to try to get to a safe vehicle because it's been a substantial development program. And I think that, you know, ultimately for us, what's a good check is that our founder, Richard Branson, is going to fly on the first commercial flight with his family, and so we're not going to let him fly until we think it's safe. So that for us is a very good concrete sign that we are going to take our time to get it right.
Thank you. So, Alan, we see a growing interest mainly in the US for commercial human spaceflight and associated activities, and we see that the situation is different in other countries. So from your standpoint, how important is to think long-term, and what do you think is needed to properly sustain the long-term vision for space activities?
Is that better? Whilst the steps that have been made so far clearly are good, and reaction engines, myself in particular, endorse that. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Just again to say that I welcome the steps that have been made, but there's a difference in what is happening in space at the moment and what is happening in every other transport system. So, for example, people who operate railways don't build them. They buy them from people that make railways. People that operate aeroplanes don't build them. They buy them from people that make aeroplanes. And I think where this business has got to go to is where operators are specifically operators, and they buy their equipment from the people that make the equipment. And competing operators then compete in the same market. And that's what economic operations in transportation is really all about. And what I would like to see over the next 10, 15, 20 years is a move to where we have a space transportation industry in which operators operate and manufacturers manufacture, and that there is true commercial competition in the marketplace to fly the payloads that are going to go particularly into orbit. I'm not really addressing here the suborbital field, which I feel is a specific niche industry that has grown out of the capability that currently exists in space transportation. So my view is it's got to move a lot further from where it stands at the present time.
And do you believe there is a different approach, clearly evident between what's going on in the United States and other countries?
I think the United States, as always, is very entrepreneurial in this business, and I think that Europe lags behind in that vision. I think still in Europe we think very strongly in terms of government-backed projects, government-developed launches, government-subsidised operations, etc. Because I don't think we have a stronger social view in Europe, but right at the beginning of your opening of this session, you emphasised the return that had come to benefit mankind. And that's clear. I mean, the expendable launch vehicle business has been very expensive, but all of our lives are infinitely richer for that having taken place in ways which are hard to put cash to. In the United States, I think there are mechanisms that enable private finance to couple more closely with that process. I think in Europe, we seem to lack the initiative to do that. In the United Kingdom, the company which I'm part of has made progress on that. 90% of the funding that we have comes from private investment, and it's small beer compared with what is taking place in the States, but it's still much larger than anything else that's taking place in Europe.
Thank you. So, Luz, Arianespace has been a pioneer a few decades ago in going commercial. Let me ask you a question which can be considered tricky. Do you perceive today any gap in the field of commercial human spaceflight between the US and the rest of the world?
It's tricky to speak after all these gentlemen, and I may look at the old-fashioned and boring European woman here, not with no real entrepreneurial mind. But, however, yes, we have been launching. We were in fact at Arianespace the first launch service provider that was created over 30 years ago. So we work for sure with commercial customers. We know how to work with commercial customers, and Ariane 5 launches mainly for commercial customers. More than 80% of the flights that are performed by Ariane 5 are for commercial customers today. So we are for sure sometimes told that we don't know, we don't think out of the box. We have been maybe inventing commercial launch service provider business a few decades ago, but we have not changed so much since then. I think it's wrong for sure. I think we are not making radical move as the US have started now and what they are doing now, but. Still, we have been developing, and ESA has been developing Vega in a very different way from what was done 20 years ago for Ariane 5. We are procuring in a very different way with responsibilities and the share of responsibilities with the manufacturer, with the prime contractor, which is very different from what we used to do. So there is a transfer of risk to the manufacturer, and I am pleased to see that Alan just explained before that the business model where the operator is doing the operation and the manufacturer is manufacturing the launcher may be a good business model, because we are convinced that that's how it should work, and we are trying to go further, so maybe we will speak during this hour, but we may go even further and make some moves further. But since we have been launching Ariane, now Solune and Vega, for sure we have changed our ways of working, our way of sharing the responsibilities and the risk with the industry, and our way also of working with our institutional support, even though we are still for sure supported, and we are very pleased to be still strongly supported by the institutional European entities. We'll see if we can go further and be maybe in the future less supported by them. We are working on that for the future of Ariane. But at the same time, it's maybe I won't go into details on that point, but being supported can mean a lot of things. I mean, we've got in Europe we manufacture in euro, we sell in dollars, we have to pay quite an important fee to use the ground equipment in French Guiana, which may be different for some other competitors we've got. So I will not go into details in the business model we've got, but for sure we progress. We have progress, and we will go on to progress. We will go on that path to become more and even more commercial than we are today.
So thank you. We will come back on that. So let me ask now something to Silvio. EADS Astrum has a strong heritage in aeronautics too. Extending aeronautics towards space looks really promising. Which is your feeling and your thought about that?
Well, thank you, Simona. As a major aircraft and spacecraft manufacturer, we of course are convinced about the need to bring aeronautics closer to space. But what does it really mean? At first sight, superficially, it may mean to develop vehicles whose architectures are at the crossroad between a rocket and a plane. And for sure we are working on that too, as you certainly know. But I think there are a number of other ways in which aeronautics can, shall I say, contaminate space in a good way, in a positive way. First of all, by making us move from absolute technical prowess to absolute repeatability. I think most of you flew in here and are quite relieved to think that they flew on something which was not designed for technical excellence, but rather for safety, dependability, and economies of scale, of course. And to do that, you need to really think that way. And I think, and I'm with Alan on that one, there's nothing like competition to push you to do that. So, as you know, Ariane, for example, is on the commercial market, and Luce, of course, is shy, but we just clocked the 51st successful launch in a row, and we believe that the fact that we are on the commercial, we, meaning Arianespace, is on the commercial market, is subject to the competitive pressure out there, forces us to work in a more industrial, repetitive way. So instead of doing one-of-a-kind masterpieces, we should do identical stuff that can fly dependably. And the second point to get there, and there are, I think we can also take a leap from aeronautics, and we can move closer to that, is to design products that are closer to aeronautic standards so that we can leverage a wider supply base. And by the way, when I think about a wider supply base, it's probably up to industry to sort itself out in terms of supply chain and decide who they should buy from. Of course, we understand our technologies are very sensitive and national independence is a very important issue. But once your independence is guaranteed, we think there's more you can do in terms of international cooperation. And then again, let's think at aeronautics. Both the United States and Europe are very proud about our respective national champions, Boeing and Airbus. We wave the flag, we sue each other in front of WTO. But at closer inspection, probably half of a Boeing plane is made in Europe and half of an Airbus plane is made in the States. And strangely enough, Airbus is a supplier to Boeing and Boeing is a supplier to Airbus. So competition does not rule out cooperation when it does make business sense. And we did start a few projects to go this way, like Liberty, and we think that once we guarantee that national independence is preserved, there is room there to bring in even more of the gains that the commercial space initiative of NASA and of other countries promises. And the last point that goes with all the above is that we need to move maybe a bit away from qualification-driven development to certification-driven development. In other words, the role of the public hand might be not to specify to the tiniest detail a flying object, but rather say under which rule that flying object is actually flight-worthy. And this movement will allow to leverage all the other elements I mentioned, and these are very, very at the heart of aeronautics. So if we manage to move in that direction on these various aspects, our rockets might not have wings yet, but I think we'll be much closer to aeronautics than we are today.
Thank you, Silvio. Very, very interesting. And so I need to pose you another question now at this point. How do you feel the institutional sector position about what just mentioned in Europe?
Oh boy, that's
good question.
That's a very good question indeed. We certainly welcome the ESA Director General's initiative called NELS, New European Launch Service, which is asking the question to industry exactly along those lines. So, how do we need to rethink our sector, our business, the way we specify, we design, we manufacture a launch service in a way that it makes economic sense as well as technical and operational sense. So I think the message is slowly getting there. When it comes to some of the other aspects, I think both in Europe and maybe elsewhere too, there's some more, the road is still ahead of us. Like moving from qualification to certification, this is something in Europe we are still at the early intellectual stage, I'd say. When it comes to a worldwide supply chain managed by industry for products developed by industry, leveraging the best competencies where they are, I think recent news shows that we are far way off, not only in Europe but elsewhere.
Thank you. So, at this point in time, I would like to go back to George Neild, and I would like to ask you a question about traffic management. So, is FAA working on how to mitigate the effects of this expected increase in space traffic and its integration with the air traffic control?
Yes, very much so. First, I think it's important to remember that in the National Space Policy that was issued by the American administration back in 2010, there was a challenge to rely heavily on commercial space transportation and private industry and having a very diverse and robust commercial space transportation industry. And as the level of commercial activity in space increases in the years ahead, we certainly need to figure out how to do that safely. When we are only flying 4 or 5 space shuttle launches per year, it is easy to carve out some restricted area and just ask aircraft not to fly through that during the period of the launch window. But if we're going to be flying on a weekly or even daily basis, especially with the suborbital operations, we really need some new ways of doing business there. So we are investigating new technologies, new avionics, new operational techniques, as will be implemented for the next generation air traffic system in the United States. And we're talking right now with the other parts of the FAA and with industry about how to safely integrate all users of our national airspace system, both the aircraft and our space vehicles.
And meaning that what you are doing is really key to allow commercial human space transportation industry to grow?
Yes, I think that will be a key. And expanding that question a little bit, there are other implications too. For example, the environment. And as we do our licensing operations in the FAA, an important component of that is to do an environmental review before we grant a launch license or a spaceport operator's license. And so we try to understand all the implications in terms of noise and pollution and impact to the natural environment so that we are making the best decisions and can have an industry that can grow, but in a way that respects our environment and all users of our airspace.
Thank you. Meaning that if the industry grows, we will see more and more opportunities to reach lower orbit managed. So, Bill, can you tell us a bit about the possibility to get commercial manned capabilities operational by 2015?
Again, kind of our approach was to start with the cargo activities which we have, and we do it in a demonstration phase with cargo first, and then we actually then contracted for services for cargo delivery to ISS. And I think what's important in that phase is we can take a substantially more risk with cargo than we could with the human occupant or with the crew member on board the spacecraft. So I think this is a great way for us to learn in an environment where if we have a problem and it doesn't work well and we lose cargo, it's not catastrophic to the industry. It doesn't stop us where we are. It's something we need to learn from and continue to move forward. And it doesn't say that this whole model is broken or has failed. It just says we're going through the natural learning process, and I expect us to learn as we go forward. So I think doing cargo is extremely good to work through some of the issues and some of the areas that we've really got to define as we carry humans. We're working pretty hard now on the human piece. We've just awarded the SpaceX for the commercial crew integration capabilities activity that will essentially take the vehicle's designs from a preliminary design review level to approximately a critical design review level. We've got 3 companies in that phase, SpaceX, Sierra Nevada, and in Boeing, and they're all working on these activities, and they're moving forward. And then we're also now have a request for proposal out on a contract. It's a certification phase, and what we've asked the providers to tell us in that phase is what alternate specifications would they want to use for their development. So in other words, this is giving them a chance that says they don't have to build to the specs we have typically always built to in our industry. They're able to tell us if there's aircraft standards that was talked about earlier that are better, they ought to give us those standards. We'll take a look at them. So they're going to give us what alternate standards they want to use. If they don't want to use high-class avionics or EEE parts in space, they can deviate from those. They need to tell us that information. But that's not enough information. They also need to show us the hazard report associated with their vehicle, how difficult it is to fly. So then we can use that to determine, hey, is this back off in a specification, a pressure vessel spec, or an avionics spec? Is it appropriate for the hazards they're trying to control? So we've asked for that. We've also asked for their certification documents, how they plan to certify this design and how they're going to do it. In the earlier discussion, we talked about kind of certification versus specification. We're pulling here on what do they want to do? How are they going to say that this vehicle is safe to go fly from a certification standpoint? And then the last document we're asking for under this contract is a verification plan. How do we know that you really have done this certification that says you're really safe? Those contracts will be hopefully awarded in February of next year. They'll run for about a 15-month period, and then we'll go into a phase 2 contract to actually go procure the services. When we look at that, I think there's a reasonable chance that we see some of the providers, they can be there earlier. They say they can be there maybe 2015, 2016, that kind of time frame. From a NASA perspective, we're assuming the service comes online a little bit later in 2017. That provides some margin between what they're promising and where we are, and we're not committed to a path where we have to have them delivered on a certain date. So I think we've got a reasonable chance. We have a pretty well thought out, laid out methodology to go do this activity, to acquire this service in a new way. I'm sure we will learn through this process. We will adapt to what we learn, and we will change as we go forward. But I think it's an exciting time as this transition phase moves forward, and we'll see how well they do. I turn it over to them. We'll see how well they do. The onus is on them to deliver. We've laid out the things. I've removed as many barriers as I can. I've tried to pull back all the restrictions that we have, and we're going to let them be creative and do this in a different way and see what we get as an end product. So the proof will be in the products, the flights, and the milestones as they move forward.
So thank you, Bill. Very interesting, meaning that, okay, now I have a tricky question for you too, again, escape. So taking into account what you said and also what we know on the NASA situation, can you say that the present situation is a clear indication of the American leadership in pioneering commercial space, human spaceflight activities?
Yeah, that's a tough thing. You know, because we're doing this, are we a leader? Yeah, maybe, but I would say we're doing this not necessarily because we wanted to, right? This is pretty transparent, right? But as a government person, right, I kind of like the old way of doing business with these big government programs and controlling specifications and not being in this new world. This is a little riskier for me. So if we had a choice to probably do it the old way, we would probably keep doing it the old way. But our financial situation is pretty tight. We really want to get beyond low Earth orbit. We want to push the boundaries of exploration. It's time for government to let go, to see if industry can go do this. And because of that financial incentive to do things a different way, that's creating the emphasis for us to move forward. So, you know, whether we're a leader or not, I don't know. I joke sometimes with my friends, we do innovation by desperation. And what that means is we only innovate when we have to innovate. And so I think the situation has been created, and we're going to innovate not because we necessarily want to, or we're a leader, or we're brilliant. We're going to do it because we have to keep moving forward. So we'll see how it goes.
It was a tricky question, yes. Back to George Whiteside and talking about some concrete experience. George, could you please tell us about at least one very significant event or experience you had in developing Virgin Galactic and its projects?
Well, you know, we have a lot of significant events, obviously, but One event that we recently completed was our subsonic test flight program, and that was a big deal because now we're ready for powered flight, and we're looking forward to starting to go up rather than glide downwards to the surface of the planet. We've learned a lot in the glide test program, but I think everybody who's here knows that the hard part is progressing through higher Mach numbers, which we're about to start early next year. And that'll be exciting. It'll be, exciting for good reasons, and also exciting. I'm sure we'll have our share of things that we'll learn in that experience. But we have a really great team of folks from Scaled Composites and now internally, and we are going to fly a vehicle at Mach 3.5, maybe as high as Mach 4 with couple pilots in it, and that's going to be a big deal. I think the world will pay attention, and we just want to do it incrementally so that we progress through that test flight program as wisely as we can.
So thank you. Very, very exciting. Only listening to it, so I can imagine what it is driving it. So Alan, okay. Just to make a parallelism, what about your experience with Skylon and what you are doing there?
I hate technology. Skylon is progressing. We've gone through several design iterations, and we're currently working on what we think is the version that will get built. We've been doing a very great deal of work on the actual propulsion side of the vehicle. Obviously, a vehicle like Skylon, it's the propulsion that is really the groundbreaking technology, and that has gone extremely well. During the course of this past year, we've actually moved to the point of we've been able to make heat exchangers. I don't know if any of you understand the way that the Skylon engines operate. We cool the air in an air-breathing engine to Mach 5. Thereafter, we transfer to rocket propulsion effectively to go into orbit. But the bit up to Mach 5 is the important part. We've demonstrated over a year ago we can make those components, and now we have them on test and are showing that they actually perform as they would be expected to perform. That program is, I've got to confess, running a bit late. Anyone here who's been mixed up in development programs know all of those issues and how much sleep we lose over getting everything to work properly. I'm pleased to say that we're fairly close to the end of this particular demonstration program. So the indications are that, contrary to many views, single-stage vehicles, which look like aeroplanes, are possible to fly to orbit and return, and then a couple of days later to do the job again. I believe that we are now within months, not years, of actually proving that to the world absolutely. And so the question is, what is the world going to do about that? Reaction Engines is open for business to talk, particularly in Europe, but also elsewhere, to the United States and so on, with regard to how we're going to push that technology forward. My view is that Skylon, and that's only a name for a particular type of this vehicle, will change the future. I mean, it is, as far as we can see, the Buck Rogers space plane. It takes off, it goes into orbit, it does its job, it returns, and then can do it again 200 times. We've every reason now to believe that that's feasible. So we're talking to various companies within Europe, within the United States. Silvio alluded to certain legislational issues, and protectionist views of our technology. I think if we're going to make real progress, we've got to get over those issues. So Skylon is making progress.
Thank you, Alan. Impressive. And so let me go to ask another very interesting question to Silvio. IAC is developing both traditional, commercial, and innovative systems. Which is the strategic difference between the two approaches from your standpoint?
Right. Well, of course, they do serve different destinations, and using different technologies, they serve different markets, so they're aimed for different services. But I think they are all part of an overarching vision, which is, I think, something which is not only shared at Astro Many ADS, but it's shared in this room as well, which is to change the way we get to space, to make it easier, more affordable, more dependable, so that we are able to do in space all the things we think we can and we should do as countries and as humankind.
How long will it take, in your opinion, for this new way to get into space and to become a reality?
I think this is a question to us all as well. You know, we like to think that in order today we have a relationship between the public hand and the private sector. And if we want to change this, we both have to change ways. And if we take, for example, the way NASA went about changing what they asked and how with commercial space, that allowed us, for example, in Liberty, to leverage a different way of working. And you can tell that the NASA way is working because you got, shall I say, old dogs like ATK and us playing new tricks, and adding to the industrial approach and, you know, taking things in your hand. The other element of private enterprise, which is, you know, if you have it, don't invent it again, which means trying and leverage and use whatever you have already at hands and try and make it work to provide not a pretty vehicle maybe, but an effective service. And when we're talking about the wind vehicle, the spaceflight type of missions, of course, this may be a bit farther away, but again, as been said by many people, the technology's got to be there, the private initiative's got to be there, including with capital, and the public hand has got to be there with the right regulatory framework.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very interesting. We should stay here, hours and hours to discuss these very interesting topics. But let me move to Ariane's pass again on another, tricky question, at least from my standpoint. Luz, how much you share the expectations that space agencies could leave the human low Earth orbit activities to the private sector in order to devote their efforts to the human exploration of the solar system?
Thanks for the question.
I'm sorry.
You understood that we are still quite skeptical about the fact that we'll have hundreds of flights in the coming years to LEO, but we would like that, of course. We will welcome this extended field, and we will welcome it also because it will of course push the demand, but it will also boost new ideas and maybe change our way of thinking and of seeing this the way to go to space. Regarding the questions and the fact that the space agencies could not being so interested, I would say, in low altitude, and then devote all their efforts to space exploration. For sure, we can see a trend on this. At our level, for space transportation, I mean, it's not such a big, it does not make such a big difference because we need more or less the same building blocks to go to low Earth orbit, or to go beyond, to go to escape or high altitude. So I think we need to make synergies between these two worlds in any case, and to find the ways to build and to design the correct building blocks that will allow us to make both. In fact, to have. I'm quite skeptical about the fact that there will be private entities that will be able to make a business model, a sustainable and a viable business model, but I may be wrong, but I'm still quite skeptical on this, and that these companies will go for private LEO access to space for some happy fews, and maybe more in the future that we will be able to pay for the premium tickets and go to lower altitudes. Maybe yes, I may be wrong, but I'm still skeptical on that. And for the human exploration into space, for sure, that will be an interest for public, for space agencies, for sure. And I believe that they will need to work together and to cooperate to achieve this goal.
So in a way you see the possibility of an increase in your business, not tomorrow, but let's say in the future, if there are more private activities devoted to bring cargo and humans to low Earth orbit. You see any advantage in terms of business for your company?
Yes, of course. There are pros for us because we already launched the ATV, and we would like to go on launching a cargo to the station, and why not in the future also human flights? Yes, for sure. We always welcome the extension of our playing field, and we will be very happy for this coming for these new initiatives. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, meaning that the more we have under development in terms of cargo in human systems to low Earth orbit, the more we need spaceports in US and elsewhere. George, can you please sum it up the status of development of spaceports in US and also outside? Because I believe this can give a sense of what's going on worldwide in this field. So,
yes, there are currently 8 FAA licensed spaceports in the United States. There is interest from a number of other locations. In fact, just in the last few months, we've gotten senior government officials writing to us from Georgia, Florida, Texas, Colorado, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and other locations, all interested in how do we become a spaceport. And I think it's very interesting that spaceports may offer an opportunity for some of this partnership and cooperation that we've been talking about on the panel. Not every country can afford to have its own rocket development system or companies or its own space program, but many have the basic infrastructure, such as an airport, that might be usable as a spaceport in the future. So as soon as George Whitesides and some of the other suborbital companies are able to demonstrate that they have a vehicle that is capable of safe, reliable, cost-effective suborbital flights, and once those have completed their flight test program, I think there will be an opportunity to take some of those vehicles to multiple locations around the world, and that will help others to become involved in our space programs and offer an opportunity for additional cooperation in the international community. We've tried to come to events like this and talk with our counterparts in other nations. Certainly there's interest in spaceports and other activity in Sweden, in Scotland, Singapore, United Arab Emirates, many other locations, and they're eager to see how they can become part of this exciting new industry. We've also heard some discussion about certification and how do we approve those. I think it will be very important for the governments involved to look at new ways to ensure safety, because safety is very important, but also in a way that maybe lets go some of the traditional government control that we are used to in the aviation industry. If we're willing to make these as safe as we can but recognize, again, as Bill said, that space flight is inherently risky, then I think we have an opportunity to learn the lessons that we're going to need to enable safe and successful space operations in the future.
Thank you. So, what I see from your answers is that for sure we have a sparkling community worldwide, and one of the topics could be international cooperation. So, Bill, how do you feel international cooperation should learn from what we have done already, and what we should do to cope with the sustainable integrated public and private manned access to space as a step towards a sustainable presence of humans in the solar system?
Okay. I have 5 days to talk about this question. I would just say that international cooperation is extremely important in what we're doing. You know, the other thing we talked a little bit around here is that we talked a lot about the launchers and getting to space. I think we need to talk a little bit about the market in space. You know, we've yet to show that there's a market, there's a tourism market that's been exhibited, but are there other things that is really out there that we need to have? And I think a piece of that could be the International Space Station. It's a tremendous platform to demonstrate to commercial industry, is there a market out there to actually go do microgravity research, to do biological research, to take advantage of the high vacuums of space? Is there a market that commercial industry can respond to? And I think that's my dream, is that we can use the ISS to show to industry that, hey, there is a market out there, that there is a commercial advantage to you as a company to do space-based research. That creates a new economy, that creates a new drive, and then that enables this market, the transportation market we've been discussing here earlier on this panel. So I think we need to not forget about this wonderful international facility we have built, and how we can utilize that facility in the best way to demonstrate to others that there really is a market out there other than a government market that allows this transportation to take off. Then the other side of that dimension is really we need to change the way to get to space. If we stay with our traditional way of getting to space, even though we've got a commercial market, it doesn't sell. So we've really got to work on this in a couple dimensions. We've got to show that there's a market out there for the commercial industry where they want to go do space-based research to develop pharmaceuticals or materials or chemicals or whatever they want to do, maybe even Earth observation. That needs to be there, and then we need to make access to that new unique location more affordable and affordable for that transportation. When that happens, I think then we're really ready to start moving forward. And we're right now in the middle of that transition. So we will see over the next year or so how much progress we make and how we move forward. You know, meanwhile, as a government, we're still going to keep pushing beyond low Earth orbit to be pushing for that technical excellence side. That's what governments are good at. But we need this repeatability, as was said earlier. That's what we need to get for the transportation piece, as well as to make sure that there's a market out there that needs this reliability and repeatability to go to.
Thank you, Bill. So we've been very good in keeping the schedule, allowing me to ask the audience if there are questions to the panelists. So we have someone with a microphone. So if there are questions, please, okay? Question here. Could you please present yourself and it's coming? And also to whom you are addressing your question, please.
Hello, I'm Serge Plata. I'm currently at CNES, and I would like to ask a question to the founder and director of Reaction Engines. Bearing in mind that you have gone through a number of technical hurdles, is it possible for you today to give a date for what would be the first, I would say, demonstration flight to bring a significant payload in orbit and come back to Earth? And the second tier of my question is the following: how mature is currently your program, in as much as it could be interesting to feed in a European program funded by a European entity? Thank you.
Okay, the current schedule obviously depends on the availability of funding. Is that Skylon would become an operational vehicle in 2022 on the current planning. By operational, I mean that would then start to go into the hands of private operators, because the business model for Skylon is that we don't intend to become a vehicle developer and satellite launcher. Only intention is that Skylon would be built by the industry and sold to specific operators, and there may be something ultimately like 10 to 15 operators using the same hardware around the world. The actual development cost of the vehicle at the present time is about $14 billion, which is obviously a substantial sum. But the important part of the business model is not the traffic to go to orbit. This is late to the industry for several decades now. The important thing is that around the world, many nations want their own unencumbered access to space, and therefore these people will buy those vehicles, same as people buy aeroplanes to have their own independent airlines. So it's important to understand the traffic model. Once those people are operating those vehicles in competition, we anticipate that in a mature state we'll be looking at approximately $5 million per launch in order to get something of the order of 15 tons of payload into low Earth orbit. Now that figure depends very much on how the insurance industry sees the business. That reflects on the situation with regard to certification and so on in a big way in the development program. Now, there isn't time to go into all of the detail of that, but by and large, the whole of that business case closes, and it closes without having to put in government subsidies, and it looks as though the future traffic, at a much lower price to the customer than at the present time, closes and pays for the development of the vehicles and the purchase price and operating of those vehicles. That's about as succinct as I can be, I'm afraid, in the time that's available.
Thank you. So we have time just for another question. Tommaso?
Tommaso Sgobba, European Space Agency. I have a question for George Nield about certification. For something like more than 300 years, in maritime business, certification has been done by specialized non-government, non-profit organizations called classification societies, like Lloyd Register connected with insurance. Do you see a possibility in some time in the future for a similar self-regulation or self-certification scheme to be applied to a commercial human spaceflight?
That could be a part of the future. Now, it's important to remember, what does certification mean? Bill has talked about NASA certifying the vehicles for the Commercial Crew Program to meet NASA standards and so forth. There's other definitions that have been referred to here that are more similar to certifying aircraft as we have for commercial airliners. Frankly, it's our position that it may be a little bit premature to certify vehicles in the same way as we certify commercial airliners, because we don't necessarily know today exactly what those design characteristics and operational procedures ought to be in order to have the kind of safety levels that we all need and want. Historically, there has been about 1% of human space flights that have ended in tragedy, and that is completely unacceptable for a long-term successful industry. But if we insist that everyone follow what we know today, we're going to enshrine that 1% level as the best we can do. So we need new ideas, we need innovation, we need creativity, and it is our hope that we can make these systems as safe as possible, but not necessarily constrain the design in the way that certification processes historically have done. So that's the challenge we face.
So thank you. There is no enough time for another question. I would like just to take 1 minute of your time to first of all thank you all for your time and your answers in this panel, but also for your dedication in your organizations and what you are doing for the advancement of humankind, and also for your friendship. Thank you. Just to mention one important initiative which is a little bit at the beginning. And it's an activity that one foundation and one association. So the International Space Safety Foundation on one side and the International Association for the Advancement of Space Safety together are pushing a lot, which is called ICAO for Space. It's a potential revolution in international civil space organization built around the common objectives of safety and sustainability by standing up the mandate of the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, to space. I'm sure that you share with me the fact that there's a lot to do, but probably that's the reason why we are so excited and keen to cooperate and go ahead, sharing our ideas and working in a cooperative way to get it done. As usual, I would say. International cooperation overall, awareness of the importance of safety, promotion of commercial human spaceflight is a must-do for the future. Thanks again, and good luck.